More than just a survivor, this woman's journey redefines the narrative surrounding a notorious serial killer. This is the Kathy Kleiner Rubin story. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining me today on this special episode of Women in Crime. Today's format is a little different because I'll be interviewing the woman at the center of the story, and we are going to hear most of her story in her own words. As many of you already know, I regularly teach a course about serial murder, and while I have the academic knowledge about the topic, I don't have the personal insight, luckily, that might provide a completely different perspective. To this end, Kathy Kleiner Rubin is here today to discuss her personal experience with a serial murderer, her journey of survival in more ways than just one, and how her opinion of her assailant greatly diverges from the dominant narrative in the media. She wrote a book, A Light in the Dark, which we will discuss in greater detail during this episode as well. For now, I'd like to welcome the woman at the center of today's story. Hello, Kathy.
Hi, how are you today?
I am great. I just want to thank you so much for being here with us. And I want to start, Kathy, by telling you that your book was incredible and I couldn't put it down. I read it so quickly. I consumed it so quick. I just could not believe how immersed I became in your story. It was really great. So this is your story of surviving 3 death sentences, as you put it, because there are 3 periods here. And it's not just about survival. As you say, you thrived and you became a voice for many other women whose voices were taken. So we'll walk through all of that. But I'd like to start the podcast by describing how your life began.
I was born in Miami, and I still live in South Florida. I went to elementary school in Fort Lauderdale. I was in 6th grade. I became very ill, and I couldn't stay up. All I wanted to do was sleep, and I had no appetite. And I didn't know what was wrong with me, and my parents didn't know, so they took me to a pediatrician. And he suggested that I go to the emergency room at the hospital, at Children's Hospital in Miami. He knew something was wrong with me, but he didn't know what. I went to the hospital, and I ended up staying there for 3 months. The doctors did not know what was killing me. My body was attacking itself. I had biopsies and all the tests, but they couldn't figure it out. So at the end of the 3 months, the doctors told my mother and father to take me home and keep me comfortable because they didn't know what was killing me. At that time, a doctor at the hospital, a Cuban doctor, said that she had an experimental chemo that she'd like to try with me. And my parents said, yes, anything. So I was given chemo. I was in 6th grade, 13, and scared. I would get my chemo, and then I would go home back to Fort Lauderdale, and I would be so sick and just staying in bed and throwing up, and just horrible memory. And then I started losing my hair. I lost all my hair. I was homebound, 6th grade, had no friends, had no hair. No one could come in and play with me, and I couldn't go out. And I'd look out the window and see all the friends playing, and they didn't look in and wave or anything. They just didn't see me. And sometimes when I was homebound, I dialed 0 to talk to the operator on the phone just because I was so lonely. And sometimes they would be able to talk to me, and other times they were too busy. So this went around for about 9 months, and my mother wouldn't let me go out at all. Except toward the end of the months, I asked if I could go to church because I figured that's one place she would actually say I could go. So we did. We went and went to the back of the chapel and stood outside as best we could. And then when the service was over, we left. We went and had ice cream that we ate in the car, and it was like the best day of my life. We went home, and not 2 weeks later, I came home with shingles. So now I'm bald. I have shingles all over my face and my neck, and I still can't go out and play. And it was just a really bad time for me. But the chemo was working on me because I had systemic lupus. I had childhood lupus, and no one
Wow.
thought about it in the 1970s. And they were like, we don't think that's what it is, but we didn't check for it either. So that's what I had, and the chemo helped to put it in remission. So I still have lupus, but it has been in remission for a number of years. After I graduated from elementary school, I decided to go to high school from Fort Lauderdale High School. I went there and no one knew me. I had been out of the classroom per se for 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I went in and I joined drama class, and I
Ah.
loved it. I loved it. It was so much fun, and I met the greatest people who are still friends of mine today. And I could act and be anyone I wanted to be, except that sick little kid with no hair that was homebound for that whole year. But we did pantomime, we did plays, and it was great. So now I graduate from high school, and it's time to go to college.
Hold on, I'm going to
And
stop you really quick. Sorry, I don't want to. I don't want to
no,
gloss through. Before you get to college, I
okay.
just wanted to also ask you a little bit about your mother and your father and your home life. As I recall, your parents were married, but your father died at a young age, and you were adopted by your stepfather. It
Yes.
seemed like. Can you talk about that? Because it seemed like he was your father, and you were very close. And I love
Yes.
the way you describe the dynamic between him and your mother. So can you let us in on that a little bit so we know what your home life was like?
I was born in Miami, and my mother was married. My daddy was handsome and so well liked and just picked me up and
Oh,
loved on me. We played games. He died when I was 5. But I do remember snippets of what he was like. And he and Mama used to get along. Both of them were Cuban, and they'd speak in Spanish and go frog leg hunting and just these things we did. After my dad died, after a while, my mom remarried.
right.
And we all got to know him. It's Harry Kleiner. And we all loved him as a family. It's myself, my brother, and my sister. So he was accepted with open arms. He was a big guy. He was like 6'2", and I was small, and my mother was only 5'2". So there was a big difference in size, but their love just filled up the room. And he just treated us with such respect, the children, and just made me feel that he now was my dad. I didn't
Hmm.
think of him as a stepfather. I thought of him as my father. And we
Right.
had great years together. And he was with me when I was diagnosed with lupus, and he carried me through that whole scenario. And he was so big, and I was so little in his arms, and he was always taking care of me, which is a great feeling of being safe.
I think I read, correct me if I'm wrong, that he used to bring you your medication every night at midnight or something like that. He used to stay up to bring you your medication.
Yes, with the chemo, I got a really big appetite. So I would go to bed in the evening, around 8 or 9, and I always had to take medicine for my lupus at midnight. So every night at midnight, Daddy would come and pick me up and take me into their bedroom, my parents' bedroom, put me on their big king size bed. And Mama would bring a box of Frosted Flakes cereal, a huge
Mm.
bowl, and a gallon of milk. And I would sit there and say, "Keep filling it up." And I would just eat and eat and eat. And they would laugh, saying, "How do you eat so much?" And I was just famished. And when I stopped eating, I'd lay down and kind of curled up with Daddy and went to sleep. He then would pick me up in his big arms and take me to my bedroom and tuck me into my bed. And I think they did this because they wanted me to feel secure. And waking up in the
Hmm.
middle of the night, they just didn't want to wake me up, take a pill, and go back to sleep. They wanted to make it
Right.
a family thing. And I really
Wow.
appreciated that so much. And I loved being in bed with them and the family. And
Yeah.
my brother and my sister and I used to jump on their bed and say, "Hi, what are we doing today?" So it was a good time for all of us.
You survived lupus, or after you survived, you didn't just want to survive, you wanted to live.
Yes.
And I appreciated that. So, what did that look like after you went into remission? You kind of talked about high school and drama club, and you found a little bit of an outlet there, and then you were making these decisions for college.
When I was sick with lupus and homebound, I would see my friends outside playing, and I knew I wanted to go out there, and I knew I would. And I didn't want to be sick for my parents to see me all the time because they had been through enough, and I didn't want to be any burden on them. So I
Oh,
knew I was going to get better. That was just a given. And I did everything I could. The shingles kind of brought me down a little bit because that was so
wow.
unexpected. So then I did get better, and I was finally out, and I could leave the house, and I went to 8th grade at school, but no one went to that school that I had known in 6th grade. So it was kind of like I was just coming into myself, into my own.
Right. Okay. So you went then off to high school and you found kind of a home with drama club and drama
Ye-
kids. And
Yes.
then you, at the end of high school, you and some friends decided to attend FSU in Tallahassee.
Yes, after graduating from high school, it was time to look for a college, and I looked at all the other ones in state, and my parents still lived in Miami, and they had been so cautious and careful and overwhelmingly for me to be safe and feel good. So I looked at the different colleges in the state, and I saw that Florida State was as far away from Miami as I could get and still get in-state tuition. So that was my big reason for going to Florida State. And a lot of the people I knew from drama class was always going. So it was like a little piece of home that followed me there.
Well, and you said you weren't homesick at all, which I understand completely. In fact, you were very excited to go away, as you said, and
Yes.
you were excited to pledge a sorority. I read your first choice, Chi Omega, invited you to pledge. You described being very happy at your sorority, being happy at school. When you returned your second year, though, your mother preferred for you to live in the sorority house as opposed to the dorm that you lived in freshman year.
Yes.
Why did your mom prefer this, and what did she do to get you there?
Mom was never happy that I was going to live in a dormitory because she
Mhm.
had all the feelings that it was not safe and that anyone could come in. And she didn't like the thought of co-eds in one building. So I went to an all-women's dorm
Mhm.
and stayed there. And I was up on the 3rd floor where men couldn't even come up that high.
Mhm.
So she thought she was, okay, now she's safe. But she hated the dorm. When
Okay.
I pledged Chi Omega in the spring of 1977, my parents that summer made reservations. I don't know what exactly she did, but she got me a room in the sorority house. So
Okay.
now she felt glad that in the fall I'd be moving into the sorority house. And I think about it now, and I can't imagine the angst mom and dad felt putting me in the nice sorority safe house.
Sure. I know that you had a roommate there, Karen
Yes.
Chandler.
Yes.
You described being excited, shopping for matching or coordinating bedding. I remember all of this myself. But you
Yes.
also described two significant decisions you made when discussing your room arrangements. And without telling us right now why they were significant, can you tell us what those two decisions were that you made together?
The color of the room, how we were going to decorate it, and we had a bank of windows on the back window, the whole back wall, and it was beautiful and sunny when the curtains were open. We were on the 2nd floor that faced the back parking lot, and we had our curtains open all the time because we hung pots. We hung curtain rods on it,
Hmm.
and they were beautiful. They were thriving, but because of that, we couldn't change or anything in our room. We had to go down the hall to the bathroom. So that was one big thing that I remembered that we shared together, and that how sunny and beautiful my room was.
I remember you said there was a second decision you made, though, and that was in terms of whether or not you should lock your doors. You discussed that. And
Yes,
ultimately,
I
what
did.
did you decide?
Yes, I did. I discussed it, and I just assumed we'd lock the door at
Hmm.
night. And my roommate thought it wasn't necessary.
Hmm. Okay.
So we did not lock the door at night. So our room was always unlocked.
Okay. So let me fast forward to shortly after you and your roommate Karen returned from Christmas break. You're settling back into your semester. It's January 14th, 1978, and you were invited to a wedding, a friend who was a nursing student. And you said that after you returned for an early evening, because the night before you'd been out drinking and you just didn't want to stay out late, you're
Yeah.
just tired. And I believe you said that you and your roommate were pretty much in bed with lights out around 10:30 p.m. reading
It
and
was around
doing
11:30. 11:30.
11:30
It
p.m.
was later. Yeah.
Okay. So this is a very pivotal time. You awoke around 3 a.m. and you said you awoke to a man opening your door that was open and entering your room. Can you describe for us what happened after that man entered your room?
This man had come in the back door of the sorority house that was broken. The lock wasn't working. So he came into the back door and went inside. He picked up a piece of log that we had by the back door for firewood. And he picked up that log and he walked around at the front of the house and went up the beautiful wooden staircase. And he turned the corner and he undid the light in the sconce. The light bulb, he unliked it. So now the hall was really dark. And it had like 10 or 12 rooms on each side of the hallway. And the first room he came to was Margaret Bowman's room. He attacked her. He strangled her with a pair of pantyhose that he had brought with him. And then he left her dead. And he took the sheets and took it up over her chin so it looked like she was sleeping. He then crossed the hall and unlocked door was Lisa Levy's room. He attacked her and beat her with the same club. He bit her twice, which ended up to be like fingerprints that they used in the courtroom. And he left her for dead. He then came into my room that was unlocked. And as he opened the door, I could hear the swish of the bottom of the door rubbing against the carpet. That kind of woke me up, but not all the way awake. And in our room, on each side of the wall, it mirrored each other. We had our closet, our dresser, our desk, and then the footboard to our twin beds, because the headboard was against that back window, that back wall, which were windows.
Mm-hmm.
And in between the two beds, we had a small footlocker, just you could put books and stuff on top of it. A few seconds later, I'm just kind of groggy, and I hear something. I hear this person trip over that footlocker, and he made enough noise now that I'm wide awake, and I'm looking, and there's someone standing next to me, next to my bed. And as I looked, I saw him raise his hand up over his head with something in it, and that was the log, the piece of firewood that he had picked up. He slammed it down on my face so hard, it broke my jaw, and it shattered my chin, and it tore my cheek open. So all you could see were the teeth, and my tongue was almost bit off. And as this hurt, is weird because it didn't hurt at first. And then all of a sudden the pain did hit. And I can't tell you how bad it felt. And then he went and attacked my roommate. He tripped over that trunk again. He heard I was awake. I was trying to scream, but all I was doing is making gurgling sounds because my jaw was broken and there was so much blood in my face and my mouth. At this point, I had made myself into the smallest little ball I could make because I thought if he couldn't see me, he wouldn't kill me. He came back across the room, and again, he raised his arm up over his head. But just then, a bright light shone up into our room with the curtains open. And he didn't know what that was, and I didn't know. It was all bright in there, and it was a car that was coming home, bringing a sorority sister home from a date at 3 a.m. And the light shone into the parking lot, shone up into my room, and that's when he thought he was seen. And he was really antsy, kind of going a step sideways and not knowing what to do. And he ran out of my room, ran out of the sorority, ran down the street, where he attacked another woman that night. In my room, from the light, it then turned pitch black. And I'm laying there, and I'm hurting, and I think I'm screaming out. But my roommate had actually gotten up from her bed and walked out into the hallway, which one of the other sorority sisters saw her. And she turned her around and walked her back into our room. And that's when she turned on the lights and saw the blood all over the wall. She saw me in a little ball, blood everywhere. And that's when they called 911.
Your roommate, Neri, she was the one whose boyfriend shone
Yes.
those bright lights in.
Yes.
Two things. I guess Nita had the wherewithal to observe the man fleeing, you said in your book, and she made note of what he kind of looked like, correct?
Yes. Yes. And I remember she said it looked like he was carrying an umbrella. And that was the log that he had carried out through the front door.
You also said, and I will get to this later, that moment, that light shining, and well, that's the inspiration for the name of your book, correct?
Yes, it is. A light in the dark.
Right. Okay. What happened when the paramedics arrived? Can you take us through a little bit of what happened when you got to the hospital and your injuries?
Yes. When they called 911, the police actually come in. And there was one officer that bent down next to me on the bed and said, "It's okay, honey. You're going to be all right. I'm here. I'm going to take care of you." Oh. And everything that was swirling and I'm feeling, I took that piece and I knew that I wasn't going to get attacked again. This guy was not going to show up again. So the paramedics came and they tended to the best they could because my face was all hot with the blood and it was just streaming everywhere. So they put me on the stretcher to carry me down the front stairs and into the sidewalk that was in front of the house. And I looked around and there was my police officer standing and walking right next to me. We walked out, they carried me out, and it was so cold out. It was like 30 degrees and misty rain. And there was all this commotion. There was the lights from the fire trucks and the ambulance and the police cars, and everything was swirling, and the walkie-talkies were going off and on, and they were talking to each other. And I looked to the side, and I saw a carnival. I looked over, and the squawking on the radio were the guys saying, "Come play in my booth, come shoot the balloons." And I saw the midway, and all the lights were from the circus, from the carnival. And I looked down to the very end, and there was a Ferris wheel. And I was in a place where I was okay. I wasn't scared. I knew a carnival. So my hallucination lasted not very long, but enough to get me to where I had to be, which was going to the ambulance and to the hospital.
And at the hospital, you described what it was like and when they were deciding how to examine you and the decisions that were made and the nurse that was with you. Can you take us through that a little bit?
Yes. When I got to the hospital and taken to the ER, I remember it being really cold, and I was put on the table, and they were cutting off my yellow nightgown and trying to take care of me and deciding if I should have a rate test because they weren't sure exactly what was going on with me. And I looked up being scared, and I looked up, and looking at me was this beautiful nurse with the biggest smile. And she whispered to me, "It's okay, Kathy. We're going to be okay." And she said to the other nurses that were there, "I don't think she was raped because she still has her panties on." So because of that, they did not do the rape test on me, and I had not been raped. So that look of her, and again, just seeing a face, that was something that she was the nurse that I had gotten married on Saturday, I went to her wedding, and she had the ER duty at night.
Wow. I mean, that's incredible. And I understand that you were very grateful not to have to undergo that type of exam because
Yes.
no one would want to undergo that unless
Yes.
they had to. So at the hospital, did they tell you the extent of your injuries? You told us this before about them, but were you shocked to find out how bad it was? Did the pain get worse then? Just curious how that went when you found out about your injuries.
When I was in the ER, since my jaw had been crushed, they took me into the OR and they cleaned up as best they could on my face and my body,
Hmm.
and they wired my jaw shut.
Hmm.
And as they did that, it was really hard to talk or speak
Right.
without talking and open your mouth, and I could only eat if I didn't want to, whatever came to a straw. So after the intensive care was taken to my room, and I was in my room by myself. My
Hmm.
parents, my girlfriend, my brother and sister had shown up at the hospital, and Mama received a call at 4 in the morning, the worst call you can imagine, that says your daughter was attacked and you need to come to Tallahassee. She didn't know, she didn't have any knowledge of what happened. They didn't tell her just to get there. So I'm in my room by myself, and I looked at the door, and there was a police officer standing at my door. And again, that was a thing of safe. And yes, I hurt. I hurt so bad. My jaw was wired shut. My bandages around. They had to wire my chin to make a bone because it was shattered so bad. So I'm in my room, and I'm getting lots of flowers and everything. My parents are there, and I hurt. I hurt really bad. And as my girlfriend came up to see me, she put her face down to me and said, "Hi, Kathy." And I was so embarrassed for her to see me like this.
Oh.
I didn't want her to feel bad for me. So in my mind, I was trying to be cool, you know, think of something sharp to say. I couldn't, but I just didn't want my parents to have to see me like this after everything they went through with lupus. I thought that wasn't fair to them either. So I tried to act really strong and really bold during that time. When when it was time for me to leave the hospital, I was going to be flown back to Miami, where my parents were from, and my parents were with me. And the police officers took me in an unmarked car, and they actually stopped in front of the sorority house. And as I did, they said, "We want you to go upstairs and look at your room. We want you to see if anything was missing. So if we find this person, we'll know it if he has something of yours." I didn't want to go.
Yeah, was this I'm curious because I read that. I mean, was this an option? Were they mandating you? And yeah, how did you feel about this?
I was so just getting out of bed, walking and everything was just so, everything was swirling so bad. I just assumed that's what they did. So they took an elbow each and they walked me up the stairway. And when I turned the hallway, I saw yellow crime scene tape around Margaret's door and Lisa's door. And that didn't register as anything. Then they asked me to go into my room and look on the dresser. And as I looked, all I saw was fingerprint dust that was over everything.
Hmm.
And I didn't even remember what was on the dresser, much less what was taken. And I looked down the wall and I saw my desk with the fingerprint dust. And then I saw the footboard of my twin bed. And I looked and looked at the bed. And it was my mattress was just covered in brown blood. It had dried. And my beautiful bedspread that I had picked out and took me so long to choose was wadded up in a ball with the brown stains on it from the blood. And the wall, it had blood on it and dripping down. And I stood there and I looked and I thought, this is what happened to me. This is where it happened to me. I don't have to make up in my mind where it was or was it different. I had been hypnotized in the operating room because
Oh.
this hospital, the detectives could not get information from me if I had seen who did this. When I was hypnotized, I had the memory of everything that I've said came
Hmm.
back to me. And at first I thought I was making it up because my mind was talking openly and I didn't understand what I was saying. But because of all this, it put me into the place that this happened. It happened to me. I know what happened to me. It was horrible. And I lived through that, and I saw the bed, and I said, okay, I'm ready to leave. And they walked me back down the staircase into their car and took us to the airport. After a while, I think it was in 2019, I actually got to speak with Ken Casares. He is now the retired sheriff of Leon County.
Mm-hmm.
He came to the sorority house that night, saw me on the stretcher, and didn't know if I would live or die because of my injuries. And when I told him the story of me going back to the room, he was livid. He said, no way in any way should you have been taken back to that room. That was terrible, and I never would have allowed that to happen. And I told him, because I did go, I have a realization in my head that this is where it happened. I don't have to feel like I have to make something up to fill the void. And I said at that point, for me, it was a good thing to do. And he was still angry. But he has now become a very good friend, Ken Casares, the sheriff.
I have to tell you, I was angry for you as well, but it's interesting to hear that you had a different perspective afterwards. So now that you tell me that, I think, okay, so it worked out, it was a positive thing for you.
Yes, it was.
This attack, though, on you was what you refer to as your second death sentence. So while the police were investigating, trying to figure out who did this to you, you were at home with your parents recovering. Can you tell us a little bit what your recovery was like?
When I first went home to Miami, I was in a lot of pain, and the orthodontist had to re-break my jaw and correctly wire it because my jaw would have been misaligned. So about 3 weeks after the attack, I had surgery again, and they wired me shut for another 6 weeks. So it was a total of 9 weeks I had my jaw closed. And it was difficult to get any nourishment in through a straw, but I did. And I was in a bad place. I was scared, and I didn't know of what or who I should be scared of. And I didn't want to be in a hole in a box. I didn't want to feel sorry for me, and I didn't want to not go out. I wasn't going to live like that. So I felt like I had this black mass behind me with a cloak that was going to surround me. And I didn't want that. So I looked out, and way out in the distance in the ocean was a little island I could see. It had one palm tree on it and one little sand chair. And I wanted that island because it looked sunny and bright. And I took baby steps to get to that island. And it took me a long time to take my baby steps. I couldn't do it every day, but when I could, I would just take them. And I looked behind me, and that black mass was baby steps behind me. So I finally reached my island. I sat down in the chair with my toes in the sand, and I lifted my head, and I looked out to the beautiful blue sea with the sun shining on it, and I was so happy. And I looked, and that black mass was completely gone.
Wow.
I had walked away from it and left it because now I was going to live in the sunshine and be happy and live my life.
That's an incredibly powerful story, and I thought that was an incredibly powerful part of your book and a great way to look at your recovery. At some point, I understand you said you were afraid at first, but you don't know who to be afraid of. But at some point after investigation or during the investigation, you do learn that your attacker had been caught. So would you mind telling the audience who your attacker was and how he was caught?
When I was recuperating in Miami, my parents had taken all the articles out of the Sun Sentinel that had anything to do with the attack. And they didn't want me to watch TV because they didn't want me to be re-traumatized when all I wanted to do was know the facts.
Right.
So about 2 weeks after the attack, and I'm home, on the news was the words that we think we caught the person that killed the two sorority sisters, killed the little girl, Kimberly Leach, and attacked the two girls in the sorority house. And when they said his name was Ted Bundy. I didn't know who Ted Bundy was, I was a sophomore and a freshman in high school, in college, living and doing things in a sorority, and I had no clue of what was going on in the world, much less on the west coast of the United States. So I didn't know who he was. But when he was caught, he was caught on a traffic violation. And as the police officer stopped him and told him to get out of the car and show him his license, he produced a license that looked nothing like him. He had stolen credit cards and driver's license when he lived in Tallahassee. He then started to run from the officer, and he ran, and the officer finally caught up with him and nailed him down on the ground. And Bundy said, "You have no idea who you have." And he goes, "Well, who do I have? Who are you?" And he never mentioned himself. So at the police station, he never said who he was, and it took a while before they found out it was Ted Bundy. And back in the 70s, they didn't have the police departments together like they do now with computers. It was a matter of the people in the western top of the country were doing their own investigations and their own killings, and the people in Tallahassee and Atlanta were doing all their own things. So this was not put together information. But Ken Casares saw that there was it looked similar to the killings in Utah, where the guy came into the room at night and attacked their victim and then left. So Ken Casares put this together, and the sheriff wanted to get the fingerprints from Utah, and they sent it to him in the mail, and Ted Bundy's fingerprints matched those. So that's how they knew it was Ted Bundy.
That's good old-fashioned police work too, right there.
Yes.
All right, so you learn, it's interesting, right? We'll talk about this in a bit. You don't know who Ted Bundy is then. Unfortunately, everyone does now, but after your attackers caught, you said there were some other big developments in your life. You married your college boyfriend, Simon, I believe, who you described as your first real boyfriend.
Yes.
And you, it sounded like he was maybe a comfort zone, and your families had hoped that the two of you would just start a new life. And
Yes.
even though perhaps you weren't that interested in marriage, it was a positive for you then.
Right. Right.
And I know that you said after your honeymoon, you testified in front of a grand jury about your attack, and you described this testimony as being clinical, and that they didn't really hear about this pain and suffering behind your attack and the others, which is something I don't think a lot of people realize, how clinical it can be and devoid of emotion. But after your testimony, nonetheless, Bundy was indicted. And
yes. During not the grand jury, the detention for me to go in and give my story, there was defense at one side of the table, and there was a prosecution on the other side of the table. And I sat down, and at the head of the table was Ted Bundy.
Sorry, this was during your deposition, but not the indictment.
This was before the indictment came through.
Okay.
This is to see if there was enough evidence to go ahead and pursue after the grand jury would hear it too. But I sat down, and there was Ted Bundy at the head of this long conference table. And I'll never forget, he sat there, and he had a light blue jacket on. And he was just like, "Oh, come on, let's get over this." He wasn't scared. He wasn't antsy. He wasn't nervous. He just sat there. And I don't remember a lot of the questions that I was asked from defense and prosecution, but I remember the defense asking me if I went out and wore short shorts and short skirts, and did I stay out late at night at bars, and did I ever dance with supposedly Ted Bundy at bars, and did I let him into the into the room or anything? And they made me feel like I had done something wrong, that it was my fault that he came into the room and he attacked us. And I remember that just wasn't right. And then it was time for me to go, and I had stared Bundy down this whole time. And it was time to go. I just gave him the same stare, and I wasn't afraid at all. I felt some sort of a relief that now he was at that end of the table, and I was going to be able to walk away. And that was at the deposition.
Did he look at you at all? Did he look you in the
Yes.
eyes?
Yes. Yes. He sat there. And I don't remember seeing his
Mm.
eyes more than just dark. I mean, I would have
Hmm.
said they were dark brown and they weren't. They were blue, but that's all I could see in
Yeah.
his face when I looked down.
Wow. I know that Bundy tried to delay his trial many times after that because the grand jury did return an indictment on him. And
Yes.
he seemed to throw temper tantrums quite a bit when things didn't go his way, as you described. And it seems that from your description, he really regarded himself as the victim in this case.
Yes, he did. He did. He felt
Okay.
like he was being victimized and that he didn't do it and that everyone's, going on to him and it wasn't him.
And it seemed that he couldn't find an impartial jury in Tallahassee, but he did find an impartial one in Miami, Florida, and his trial
Yes.
began in 1979.
Yes.
Now, you spoke about the women who attended the trial, Bundy groupies, if you will.
Yes.
In our field, we call them hybristophiliacs. Why do you think these young women, who Bundy would have killed in a heartbeat, became enamored with him?
The cameras in the courtroom was the first time that they were allowed. So Bundy was on camera a lot. And right behind him in the gallery were these women. And they would swoon over him and just like, oh. And in my mind, well, first off, they needed to get a real life. But I think that a lot of them felt like he was a bad boy and that they
Hmm.
wanted to date a bad boy. So, oh, look at me. But they could and know that he wasn't going to hurt them, that he had the bad boy person inside and they wanted to date him, but he wouldn't hurt them because he couldn't get to them. And the other thing I think was a bunch of the women that did appear, and I think a lot of them felt like they could help him, more of a motherly
Uh,
feeling that
okay.
I can make him better. I can
Okay.
fix everything. And I
Hmm.
think that's another reason why a group of women did show up.
That's very upsetting to hear. I'm sure as victims in your families, I'm sure that was very hard to digest,
Yes.
knowing what you had undergone. What was it like for you to testify? Did you have mixed emotions? Was it just something you had to do? What was that feeling?
I was very nervous.
Hmm.
The trial had been moved to Miami, which is where we lived.
Hmm.
So I was really nervous. I had not wasn't allowed to go to any of the trial during the time that it was going on. They wanted me
Hmm.
to stay pure to what I knew and not be influenced by anything else.
Hmm.
So the day of the my testimony, I was nervous and I looked in my closet and I found the brightest red dress I could find and my pretty white sandals. And I went and had breakfast with my family. And then we went to the courthouse. And there were reporters and all these trucks and camera crews and everything all around the front of the courtroom. And I was taken in and I was taken back to a small conference area where I would wait until it was my turn to testify. And in that room were the police officers that attended to me that night, the paramedics who had been next to me and helped me that night. And I never thought how I would ever find them. And it was so just hugging and holding on to them. I think we both went to the same place that night, other than where we were standing at that
Okay.
point, because I know I did. So it was a good time.
Okay.
When it was my turn, they called me in, and I walked in the back of the gallery and up to the front of the courtroom. And I was sworn in and sat down in the witness box. And I was asked questions from the prosecutor and from the defense.
Hmm.
And the prosecutor wanted to know my damages and what I felt about what happened.
Hmm.
And the defense, again, were asking me questions like, did you ever dance with Bundy? Didn't you ever, see him and go out with him or anything? I'm like, no. I felt kind of pushed off by that, but I was steadfast. Bundy was sitting there and I was staring at Bundy the whole time again. And I felt strength. I felt power now. And he was sitting there just so bored. And, he was in charge of everything and he had to listen to this. And afterwards, I said what I had to say. and they let me leave. And I walked out through the back of the courtroom, and I almost threw up. I had been through so many emotions and had seen Bundy again. It was just like, whoa, this is overload. So that was the last time I did get to see Bundy.
The way you describe it in your book, Ted Bundy did not see his victims as people at all. How did he see? What was his view of victims?
He wanted to be in charge. He wanted to command the female form. He wanted to kill them and watch them die. And I don't think he had motivation as much as they say, like she had long hair parted in the middle. I think it was a reason of opportunity that he was able to approach these women. And they said that the women came to him and, willingly went off to him. Only like 2 of them went with him as hitchhikers. And back in 74 and 75, that was very common practice for women to go hitchhiking. And so they did, and Bundy did pick them up, and he did kill them. And when he would kill his victims, he would take them out to the woods, and he would cut off their heads and take off their feet and arms and put them in different places in different counties, because he was sharp enough to think they would never put it together as one murderer doing this. And he would take them and he would rape them again. And then he'd take them and they were nearly dead. And that he would go over and wash their hair and put on makeup and lipstick and then have sex with them again. So they were possessions. He possessed what he wanted. And he had in his refrigerator in his apartment that they found heads of the women in jars in the refrigerator. So this was possession. It was something he needed to do for himself. But people always tell us that he was charming. He was so good looking. He was a Republican going to be into the running field, and he could cook and, had friends and everything. And that is so not true. Bundy portrayed that because he was so manipulative. He wanted people to see that. He didn't have a split personality. He knew exactly what he was doing. Meanwhile, it took him 6 years to get his master's, his undergrad. It took him so long to get through education. He went to 2 different law schools and dropped out of both of them.
Right.
And he finally said in the last one, I don't have the aptitude for learning. He was a slow learner. He, in elementary school, he would do the typical put animals on fire. And he was a peeping Tom. And he didn't have friends. He had 1 or 2 friends that he would call friends. They never decided to be his friend. They thought he was creepy. But all the things were so untrue. He pickpocketed. He stole his clothes. He shoplifted everything. He didn't have a job. He was a loser. But he loved portraying himself as a winner.
That is very, very well said, and I think one of the biggest misconceptions about Ted Bundy. And what you describe also are a lot of early red flags. So to follow that up, do you think Bundy was born bad? Was he born in this way?
I mean, you get a little baby and it grows up, and is it nature and nurture? I think his family was Christian. His mama. It was a household, it was a Christian household. He would go to church. So he must have been born that way, I feel, because it was innate. When he was just a kid, he would go out and pee on little girls in the woods. He would take them out there and pee on them. And he was a kid masturbating in school in the janitor's locker. And he did all these things, and the kids would make fun of him. So I feel he was born that way. And that he didn't get help, so he just progressed into what he became.
Was that evil? Do you think evil is a way to describe him?
Pure evil. Pure evil. He had no remorse. He was a psychopath. He couldn't care the least about anyone's feelings, about anyone, when he could kill these women over and over. He admitted to like 32 women and said, give me more time, I'll tell you more.
a coward in the end. And I mean, ultimately, he was convicted of not all of his crimes, but he was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. But the
Yes.
judge said, and I thought this was a very significant thing in your book, the judge noted what a tragedy it was, what a waste of a life it was, a bright young man who would have made a good lawyer. And in your book, you said that this is something you wanted to correct. So for our listeners, I'd love for you to correct this and tell us what's the real tragedy here.
That Bundy was so manipulative that he even got the judge. And for judge to sit there and listen to the 6 weeks of trial and not to understand the person that he was in front of him, I think that just misplaces my judgment sometimes.
Mhm.
And I don't want to say anything bad about a judge, but obviously he didn't get the clue that who Bundy really was.
Right. And I'm sorry, you also further mentioned that the tragedy wasn't the loss of Bundy's life, but of all the women who would have gone on to do the wonderful, wonderful things and raise families, have bright careers. And that's the bigger loss here
I
that's
think
been overshadowed.
way in the beginning, I've read every book on Bundy, and I've watched
Mhm.
every movie and every documentary on Bundy. And I feel it's knowledge. It's not because I'm sick and want to relive anything. It's just I
Yes.
want the knowledge.
Yeah.
But in my book, I do mention the 32 women that he is known to have attacked and killed.
Hmm.
And I would go to a bookstore and I'd open a book and I'd see Bundy's victims. And it was a paragraph. And it was one's name, comma, Kathy Kleiner, comma, Lisa Levy, comma. And it was like so unfair, so unfair that, he had another victim that night. Well, who was it? What did she do?
Hmm.
And so in the book, I got each of the women and we got a name and we got what she was living to do. What would she love to do? What did she want to do? What was her life? What was she reaching out to do? And I gave each one a synopsis instead of a paragraph and a comma.
Yeah.
And that was so good to do. I mean,
Yeah.
it was
I l-
very good for me to do. And I felt like I was helping out and helping them in some way, let them be noticed after all these years that they weren't just someone that had died. They had
yeah.
lives.
I love that part of your book. I just want you to know, amongst many others, as you can tell. After the trial concluded, you went back to your life, and I don't mean you went back and it was all rosy. You had a lot of recovery, of course.
Yes.
But you became pregnant with a son in 1980, and
81.
I know 81. Sorry.
Yes.
Your mother was worried that the pregnancy would be harmful because of your medical history, but
Yeah, Mama, I'll just tell you, Mama was so
yeah.
upset. We had dinner one night, and we had my parents and his parents come to dinner, and we had a big cake that said, "We're happy for you, grandparents." And they looked at it, and my mother-in-law were going, "Oh, they're having a baby," and my mom's going, "What are you doing? You're going to kill yourself." So it was
Oh,
that mentality that she had been through me with, lupus the first time and being attacked. So she had an umbrella around me that she didn't want to let go of. So
sounds like you were very close with your mom, though. I can
yes,
understand her
yes,
concern for you.
yes, it was.
Now, I know that when your son was just a couple years old, and I know that you delivered a healthy child, baby and
Yes,
mama were intact.
yes,
But your marriage to Simon came to an end. You divorced, and you
yes,
describe moving to a not so wonderful apartment.
yes,
You said that you eventually found a nice townhome for you and your son to settle in. You were working as a buyer for a hospital.
yes.
But then you said that in November of 1986, this wasn't really a great time for you. Do you remember why?
Well, my son was 2 when I got divorced, and I was a single mom for 5 years. So
Okay.
he and I kind of got together growing up with each other at that point. But during the years after Bundy was convicted and put on death row, he would continue to get stays of execution. And that's when a judge would hand down and say that he would not be put to death now because he has more time for an appeal. He has more time to try to get the verdict turned. And so they gave him stays of execution, which allowed Bundy to continue to live. And he got 4 stays during those 10 years. And in 1989, it was time for the execution to happen. They called me from Tallahassee and said that he was brought out on death row and now he's being prepped to be executed.
Sorry, before you get to that, because that's very
Okay.
significant, and I really do want to hear about that, but I just want to say that I know that his executions were stayed, and I know that you had been a single mom for a while, but you did meet or re-met your now husband, correct?
Yes.
Scott Rubin, a friend from high school who, as I understand it,
He
you
was
kind of
in
had
theater. He was in drama class.
Yes, and it sounds like when you guys reconnected, it was kind of, oh my gosh, love,
Yeah.
love, sort of.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that was a pretty good time for you and
Yes.
your family
Yes.
before that time. So
Yes.
I know that then you had said it was time. 1989 came, and finally. So let's take us there. Finally, you're talking about days before Bundy's execution, where I'm sure you were worried that it was going to be stayed again.
I just assumed that it was going to be stayed again.
This time was different, though, correct?
Yes, this time was different because I got a call from Tallahassee that said that he did not receive another stay of execution and that he was going to be executed. So then that was like midnight.
Mm-hmm.
And around 3 a.m, they said that he was being prepped to be executed. And at that point, my husband and I got up and went downstairs. It's like 3 a.m. And we sat there and turned on television. And there was all this stuff at the prison. There were people protesting, oh, kill Bundy, fry Bundy. And then on the other side was let him live. Let him live. So
Right.
I turned on the TV and saw both sides and just couldn't understand why they weren't all fry Bundy. I didn't understand the other side of it. But so it took us hours for this to all happen and to go through. And then they called me from Tallahassee and said that it was over. He had been killed. And just then, the lights flickered on the screen where the penitentiary was. The lights flickered, and people were rejoicing or booing what had happened. And I sat there and I looked at my husband, and I cried. And I cried. I wasn't crying for me. I was crying for all his victims and for Lisa and for Margaret. And I wailed. And I couldn't get it out enough. And then I composed myself. I looked at my husband, Scott, and said, I'm hungry. Let's go to breakfast.
Wow. You're bringing a tear to my eye too. And I understand what you're saying about crying for the other women. Ironically, actually, Bundy, in your book, you said that you had heard Bundy begged for his life and tried to delay the end. Did you think this was ironic, considering
Yes.
that?
Yes, I did. I did. He was trying to confess and to, like you say, get a length of time where he could still live. And I can hear him say, please don't kill me. Don't kill me. And those were the last words that his victims were saying to him as he said it to his police department.
Yeah. Yeah, that wasn't lost on me either. After Bundy's execution, certainly after you went to breakfast, you and Scott, it sounds like you moved to Georgia so that
Yes.
Scott could pursue his PhD. It sounded
Yes,
like
he
a
did.
very good time for you and your family. And I know that you were making plans possibly to extend your family
Yes.
when you received some bad news. And
Yes.
I believe this is what you refer to as your 3rd death sentence.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Yes. My husband and I wanted to have a family. We wanted to have a baby. So my husband left that one morning and went to Finland, where he was doing research with them and working on his PhD. And I had gone to the airport, and then I went to my OBGYN, and I'm having my exam, and he goes, "What's this?" I'm like, "I don't know." He was doing my breast exam, and he goes, "There's a lump here.
Mm.
Why didn't you tell me you had it?" And I said, "I didn't know I had it." He goes, "Well, then you should have been doing self-exams because it's the size of a pea." And he wanted right away to go in and take care of it. And I said, "No, my husband's in Finland. He's doing what he has to do to get his PhD. If I tell him, he will come right home, and that
Mm-hmm.
part will be away."
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't tell him. And the weekend before he left, he was going to Russia on a vacation type thing. And that's when I told him, because he wasn't doing his work now, studying. He was going on vacation for a couple days. So that's when I told him that they had found a lump in my breast. So when he did get home, it had then grown to the size of a walnut in that bit of time, in a month.
Oh, wow.
So we decided to do, the doctor thought it was cancer, but of course you don't know if it is or not. So he went in to take out the lump, and they tested it, and it was cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And we had decided before that if it was cancer, I wanted a radical mastectomy.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted it completely gone. I didn't want any of it left in me.
Mm-hmm.
So I did do the radical mastectomy and 9 months of chemo.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, breast cancer is not going to get me after all this stuff. And I was getting older, and I was getting so tired of propping myself up, but I did. I knew I wanted to, so I did it. And, you never know how strong you are until you have to be strong. And then, you can be kick-ass strong. But so I went through chemo, and I had 9 months. But in my mind, I had one chemo session. And after that, I had one more chemo
Mm-hmm.
session. And I would tell Scott after that one, he goes, "No, you have 7 more." No, I have one more,
Okay.
because I can get through that. But to think I had 7 more ahead of me, I didn't want to think that way. So I did. I finished my chemo, and I did not lose my hair this time. So it fell out in clumps and pieces, but I did not go bald. So this was a time for us now to heal.
Mm-hmm.
And 9 months after chemo, I got pregnant. And we were so excited, and Mike was ecstatic, and everything was going good. And 8 weeks into the pregnancy, I had a miscarriage.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm strong for myself, and I'm strong for Mike and for Mikey and Scott, but I couldn't do anything to help my baby. And
Yeah.
so many women go through miscarriages, and
Yes.
so many carry a burden on them that I can't even imagine how they get through it. And I just couldn't help my baby. And that was very hard for me. That took time for me to get over. About 9 months later, I got pregnant again. So we were like, okay, everything bad's behind us now, please God, And 12 weeks into that pregnancy, I had another miscarriage. And as a family, this family, me, Scott, and Mikey, decided that we were not going to try to have another baby, that it just wasn't good for us. It wasn't good for Mommy, and we told Mike. So we decided that, and we went forward, and we bought a sailboat, and we named it Serenity. And that was our new baby, and we had her for many years and loved her. She was a great companion for Mike. We take her out all the time, and Mike grew up on the boat, so it was fond memories for him as well.
I gotta tell you, I understand the 3 death sentences, but you are a survivor in a lot of ways. And one of the themes I've heard from you, too, just so you know, during this conversation, is you've said, I wanted to be strong. I didn't want my parents to go through this. I didn't want Scott to go through this. Sounds like you're strong for a lot of people. You're very selfless in that regard, just so you know.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't see it that way, but I know how I feel, and I wanted
Yeah.
to make everyone else better. That's just the way I am.
I understand. I get it.
Yeah.
So it's not a death sentence, but you and Scott move on. Eventually, Scott takes a position in New Orleans, but it's 2005. And even though it sounds incredible, your home is in the French Quarter, which everyone knows is like this a wonderful, magical place. But then you have to contend with Hurricane Katrina. So it sounds like you and Scott coped pretty well through a challenging situation. Another huge challenge.
Yes, we bought our house in 2004, and Katrina hit in August of 2005. So we were in the French Quarter, and we were really high up on the by the river, which is
Mm-hmm.
high ground, and
Mm-hmm.
everything below that was low ground and had very small irrigation and had problems. So we had to evacuate citywide, and we did, and we didn't know where to go with 500,000 other people on the road. So we headed toward Texas and stayed with my sister for a week, and then left there and went to Tennessee and stayed with my son a couple of weeks, and then North Carolina, and stayed there a couple of months. We had a Yorkie, a 6-month Doberman, and a Rottweiler, and we had a 2-door Jeep, which was ragtop Jeep, and we were like all of us going around. And we didn't know when we could go back, and it ended up we didn't get back until the middle of October from when
Wow.
we left in August. So yeah, Katrina messed up the city.
Yes.
We were away from our home for so long, and when we did get back, Scott and I kind of got back sooner because he was at LSU, and he
Mhm.
wanted to see if they could do remote classes or anything. He wanted
Right.
to be there for the students.
Right.
So coming back, we moved the barbed wire and took our car to the side of the yard. So dogs went crazy in our yard. And we would look and see Humvees go out with machine turret guys on the top. And I would look out and hide because another guy around the corner had come back and they had nailed him and said, "You can't be here." And he goes, "Well, I've been here. I've been on the 3rd floor sleeping with my head in the refrigerator because there was so much shooting going
Oh
around."
my God.
So to hear his story and other people's stories is just remarkable.
Yeah.
But we did not have to deal with that. We did not get electricity until I think it was April the following year. And, it was just horrible. And Scott, when he did go back to class, stayed in Baton Rouge on a cruise liners where they put all
Right.
the faculty. And
Right.
here I am, no electricity, no gas, no 3 dogs. And I would run out because the Goodwill would be running around the neighborhood, and I'd grab something, sit on the corner, and just eat, on the street. So
Wow.
it was a time that I talk lightly of it now, but it was so bad, and it smelt like death so bad in the city.
Oh,
And it was but we knew when people were coming back in our neighborhood because you'd see their refrigerator on the corner of their house on the
yeah.
sidewalk. Yay,
Yeah.
they're back. So that was a way of recognizing when the city was coming back.
Okay. After you resettle, it sounds like you and Scott stayed in New Orleans for quite a number of years.
18 years. Yeah.
18 years.
Yes.
In which time you also had 2 grandchildren
Yes.
who are, young now, or you
Yes.
said about 8 and 11 now.
Yes.
And then in 2018, you agree to tell your story to Tori Telfer for a
Yes.
Rolling Stone article. Why
She
did
was
you
great.
agree, or why did you think it was time?
I had wanted to tell my story for many years because I thought I had a new chapter, something happened. And early on, when my son was in like eighth and ninth grade, he would play sports. So Scott and Mike would go off to play in the field somewhere, and I'd sit at home and thinking of things in my past.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "I'm not doing this. I'm missing out on my present."
Mm-hmm.
So I put all that back. I didn't try to do it anymore. And, Scott and I and Mike continued living. And at one point during this in New Orleans, we bought motorcycles so that I had a Harley and Scott had a Harley, and Mike was so embarrassed that his mom rode a Harley. would say, we'd be riding, we'd come home and he'd be at the house. He goes, take that helmet off, take your jacket off. My friends are coming over.
I think that is so
I'm sorry I
funny.
embarrassed you, Mike. But we just love New Orleans. It was a great place. And so we rode the motorcycles until we moved here to Florida in 22.
So it kind of opened a door for you telling your story. But I also want to note that you told your story and then you gave a couple interviews, right? And then you wrote this book.
Yes.
And the book, as I said, I thought was incredible. It was so enlightening because everything that I think the media portrays about Bundy, almost everything, is incorrect or wrong, or it's just so glorified. I mean, the way you describe him is accurate. He wasn't particularly smart. I mean, he wasn't, how we would categorize stupid, let's say, but he wasn't. Oh, yes, he was. Okay. He wasn't particularly bright. He wasn't particularly handsome, but yet the media has glorified him more so than, they glorify a lot of serial killers, but more so than others. Why? Why do you think that is? Why do you think he's always portrayed as this handsome, intelligent man? Zac Efron is playing him. Why is that?
Well, I think the biggest thing is money. These movies are made with these actors, and they want to make money on the movie. So they write it so that they make him all so well, so big. And then they say, oh, he killed a victim, like I said that night. And then it doesn't take you into anything of the victim. So the books are written to sell money. And They do all this because it's fun to glorify him. And, it adds to money to the books. And the actors are playing a part. They're making money. So this whole thing is, in my mind, to make money.
You also had said earlier, and I guess one of the things Bundy was good at that others maybe didn't do in the same regard, or other serial offenders, is to portray themselves as something way more special than they are.
Yes.
So Bundy had an arrogance about him, a cockiness. It was a false confidence. It wasn't real. It wasn't real at all, as I understand it. But it seems like the media just grabbed onto that and just ran with it. For those people who want to read your book, can you give us the title and authors?
Yes. My book is called A Light in the Dark, Surviving More Than Ted Bundy. My co-author is Emily LeBeau Lucchese. She was wonderful. We'd spend an hour and a half every Tuesday, and she would pick my brain, and then she would write down the words better than I could have said. But it took 2.5 years to write our book, and I'm so thankful that she was able to work with me.
I think we're also grateful that she was as well, because it came out so impactful, and it is such an important book. For what it's worth, I think your story, for those who will read it, are going to change the perception and the way we think about Ted Bundy and perhaps other serial killers. Do you think this is one of your legacies, to basically debunk the myths?
I do. Was my intent for writing the book. It's not about me, and it wasn't all about him, although he was the reason that these things were happening around us. And the biggest part and the most I'm proud of is talking about the women. That is my legacy, that I could bring a face and a light and a voice to them, because they've been in the shadows too long.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think your story will put the real focus on the women who did not survive, those who did, and those who thrived, as you would say. And I can't tell you how grateful we are that you chose to share your story with us directly. I know that our listeners will be as well. And we just want to extend a big thank you to you, Kathy.
Thank you very much.
Is there anything next for you? I mean, have you done it all, or are we riding back Harleys, or is there another book? What's next for Kathy Kleiner?
Well, and we moved here in 2022. We got a new boat. We had it. It was a beautiful sailing ship. It was beautiful. We lost her in Hurricane Ian, that came back in 2022. So we had to get another boat. So we bought another boat in 2023, beautiful, beautiful vessel. And we lost her in 24 with Milton.
Oh, my goodness.
So, of course, I have to go out and buy another boat. So we
All right.
did. This spring, we went out and purchased a boat from Miami. And we live on the west coast of Florida. And we had to sail it over to the west coast. So we thought it'd take us maybe 3 weeks to get through the islands, the Keys, and then come up. 2.5 months later, we were just getting ready to come around the west coast. We had issues with the boat, things that when you buy an older boat and they say it's fine, you go with their word. But we found lots of things, and we had to go into slips into to be repaired, and it always took longer to get parts, and we thought, and we took our time going through the Keys, and it took 2.5 months until we came home. And there's no air conditioning on the boats, so it was so hot, and every night I'd go to bed with a pound of bug spray on me and in my ears, and it still here goes. So it was something. And I remember the first night we got home and I took a shower and laid down on my sheets. It was like heaven. But it was a great trip. We had lots of turmoil and lots of things that could have taken us down. We look back now, but during the time you're just focusing and getting through each thing. We did have to get towed 4 times for running aground and being pushed into the marsh. And
But you just said something that was interesting. You said there was lots of turmoil and lots of things along the way, but it was a great time. I almost feel like that's kind of the theme of many of the eras of your life. Lots of turmoil and lots of things to survive, but
yes,
still a great time.
yes, definitely.
And
And there's so many people out there, so many women in particularly, that have had something happen to them by someone or has said negative things to them.
Mhm.
And they have to know it's not their fault that this happened. And they have to know that and feel better about themselves, because they weren't the person that did it. They were victimized. And one day they're a victim and the next day they're a survivor. And they need to move on with their life. It's hard. It's really hard to move on from something. But in my mind, I didn't want to for a while. It was just like, and then I saw myself stagnant in one place, afraid to move on. So I was going to take that and turn it around and now make it my journey, the way I wanted to write it and to do the things I wanted to. It was hard. It's hard to turn around and do that. But people are strong. You really are. And when I looked at myself, I would see my scars. And I'd know my cheek is still numb. My lips are numb. I have terrible TMJ. I've had several surgeries since the attack. And I looked at myself and see all the scars. And now I look at myself and see someone that's been through the stars. The scars are there to remind me of what I have looking forward. And it's just, in my mind, there are these things that I think of to make it better, but they really apply to everyone. They can't feel sorry for themselves all the time. They have to pick themselves up and find something that makes them happy and do it.
Well, I think you might have just inspired a lot of people to do that, Kathy. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you again for sharing your story. We greatly appreciate it here.
Well, thank you for talking to me.
Absolutely. Thank you to all of our listeners for being here, and we'll catch you next time on Women in Crime. Women in Crime is written and hosted by Meghan Sachs and Amy Shlosberg. Our producer is James Varga. Script editing is by Abagail Belcastro. Audio editing is by Siler Burr and Jose Alfonzo. And music is by Desert Media. If you enjoy the show, please remember to follow and leave a review. You can also support the show through Patreon, where you can get access to additional ad-free content such as exclusive full-length episodes, lectures, a book club, and virtual happy hours with Meghan and Amy. For more information, visit patreon.com/womenandcrime.